I stood there in the back row of that fancy auditorium, my legs aching from a double shift at the warehouse and my hands still greasy from fixing a carburetor. That morning, the air smelled like perfume and polished wood. Nothing like the oil and sweat I'm used to. My eyes burned from lack of sleep for hours a night. For 6 years. We do that to a man, but I couldn't stop staring at the stage. Camille was up there, my wife glowing in her cap and gown, a doctor. At last. I dreamed of this moment as much as she had every paycheck I'd handed over every late-night Uber run. Every time I said no to a beer with the guys so I could pay her tuition. It was all for this. My chest swelled with pride, and I thought we did it. Babe, we really did it. The crowd clapped as she crossed the stage, her smile wide and bright, her dark hair shining under the lights. I adjusted my tie, borrowed from a buddy because I never owned one, and waited for her to look my way. She didn't. She floated down the steps, and I started pushing through the crowd, my boots heavy on the carp ed floor. I wanted to hug her, to tell her how proud I was, how every sacrifice was worth it. But then she stopped near a group of her med school friends, all dressed in suits and dresses that cost more than my truck. A man stepped up beside her, tall, sharp-looking, with a suit that fit like it was made for him. His hair was slicked back, and he had this easy confidence I could never pull off. Camille grabbed his arm, her face lighting up even more, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "This is my husband, Julian. He's the reason, and I'm here today." The words hit me like a wrench to the gut. Husband Julian. I froze my breath, stuck somewhere between my lungs and my throat. The crowd clapped again, polite and happy, and I just stood there, a ghost in my own life. My hands clenched into fists, the calluses rubbing against each other, reminding me of every hour I'd worked for her. 6 years of my life poured into her dream, and she didn't even glance my way. I watched her laugh, her head tilting back, like she used to do with me and Julian, and smiled down at her like he'd been there. All along my ears rang, drowning out the chatter around me. I wanted to scream to march up there and demand answers, but my feet wouldn't move. All I could do was stare as the woman I loved, the woman I'd built this moment for, erased me without a second thought. I don't know how long I stood there, lost in the blur of clapping hands and flashing cameras. My mind raced trying to make sense of it. Maybe I'd heard her wrong. Maybe it was a joke, some weird med school prank I didn't get. But then she leaned to Julian, her hand resting on his chest, and I saw the way her friends nodded like they'd known him forever. My stomach twisted, and I felt the weight of every dollar I'd spent every night. I'd come home to an empty bed because she was studying. I'd paid for that gown. She was wearing the textbooks. She'd highlighted the rent on her downtown condo while I slept in a one-room dump with a leaky roof. And now she was calling this guy her husband. My vision blurred, not from tears, I wouldn't let that happen, but from pure RWL shock. People moved around me, brushing past like I was invisible, and maybe I was to them. I was just some guy in a borrowed tie, not the man who'd carried Camille through 6 years of hell. My heart pounded, loud and heavy, and I wondered if she'd ever planned to tell me. Did she think I'd just fade away, happy to be her stepping stone? I replayed her words in my head. He's the reason I'm here today, and they cut deeper each time. I was the reason she was there. Me, Mason Reed, not Julian, whoever he was. I'd given up everything, my time, my money, my dreams, so she could have this. And now she was standing there, rewriting our story, handing my victory to someone else. I took a step back, my boots scuffing the floor, and the sound snapped me out of my daze. I couldn't stay there, surrounded by her new life, her new lie, My chest ached. But I straightened up, forcing air into my lungs. I wasn't going to fall apart, not here, not in front of her in her fancy crowd. I turned toward the exit, my mind spinning with questions I didn't have answers to. How long had this been going on? When did I stop being her husband, and why? Why did she think she could just throw me away like I was nothing? As I pushed through the double doors into the cool night air, I felt the first crack in my world. But I didn't know then how deep it would go. All I knew was that C had taken everything I'd given her and handed it to someone else. And I wasn't sure what that left me with. I stood in that quiet hallway outside the auditorium, the muffled sound of laughter and clinking glasses seeping through the walls like a taunt. My hands were shut, shoved deep in my pockets, the borrowed tie hanging loose around my neck. Now, like it didn't belong on me anymore. The air out here was cooler, but it didn't calm the heat rising in my chest. I kept replaying Camille's voice in my head. This is my husband, Julian. And every time it hit me, it felt like a punch I couldn't dodge. I wanted to believe I'd misheard her, that it was some kind of mistake, a slip of the tongue. Maybe she'd had too much champagne, or maybe I was just too tired to think straight after pulling a double shift. But deep down, I knew better. I'd seen the way she looked at him, the way her hand rested on his arm, like it was the most natural thing in the world. That wasn't a mistake. That was a choice. I leaned against the wall, the cold plaster pressing into my back, and stared at the polished floor. My boots looked out of place here, scuffed and worn next to the shiny tiles. I tried to piece it together. When did this happen? How long had she been calling this Julian guy her husband? My mind raced back through the last 6 years searching for clues I'd missed. I've been so busy working, fixing cars, loading boxes, driving strangers around town, that I hadn't noticed her slipping away. Or maybe I had, and I just told myself it was stress, med, school pressure, nothing personal. I'd been a fool, hadn't I? A fool who thought love was enough to keep us together, even when she started spending more nights at the library than at home. Even when her calls got shorter and her smiles got rare. The auditorium doors swung open and a burst of noise spilled out. Cheers chatter, the kind of happiness I wasn't part of. I straightened up, wiping my palms on my pants, and that's when I saw Sadie Camille's little sister rushing toward me. Her eyes were wide, her face pale like she'd just seen a ghost Mason. She said, her voice shaky, "What are you doing out here? Did you hear what she said?" I nodded slow and heavy, not trusting myself to speak. Yet Steve's mouth opened, then closed, like she didn't know what to say either. She glanced back toward the crowd, where Camille was still laughing with her friends Julian at her side. "I don't understand," Steve whispered, stepping closer. "She told me you were coming tonight. She said you'd be here for her." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. Guess. She forgot to mention the part where I'm not her husband anymore. I said, my voice rougher than I meant it to be. Steve's eyes darted between me and the auditorium, and I could see her trying to make sense of it. Same as me, she'd always been a good kid. 22 now, but still the same sweet girl who'd crashed on our couch when she needed a break from their mom. She'd seen me pay the bills, cook the dinners, keep the lights on while Camille studied. She knew the truth. "I'll talk to her," STI said, turning like she was. About to march back in there, I grabbed her arm. "Gentle but firm, don't," I said. "Let her have her moment. I just need to know what's real before STI could argue." I heard Camille's voice again, louder, this time drifting out as the doors opened for someone else. "Mason?" "Oh, hey, Chike. Just a friend who helped me out when times were tough, she said casual, as if she were talking about borrowing a pen. My stomach dropped and Steve's head whipped around her jaw tight. A friend, she muttered, looking at me like she couldn't believe it either. I forced a shrug, even though it felt like my chest was caving in. Guess that's what I am now, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But inside I was breaking. 6 years of my life reduced to just a friend. Every late night, every skip meal, every time I told her, "You've got this, babe." It was all nothing to her. Now I peeked through the crack in the door watching her. She was surrounded by her med school crew, smart, polished people who probably never had grease under their nails. Julian stood there, smirking like he owned the room, and next to him was a woman in a white coat. Older, with sharp eyes, probably Dr. Simone Arnett Camille's big shot minor. They were all nodding, smiling, eating up her story. And then there was me out here in the hallway, invisible, sad. Grabbed my hand, squeezing it tight. "She's wrong, Mason. You're not just a friend, you're everything she's not saying." Her voice cracked and I could tell she was mad. Mad at Camille, mad at the lie. I wanted to believe her. But all I could feel was the weight of being erased. I let go of SDI's hand and stepped back my head, spinning. "I need air," I said, turning toward the exit. She called after me, but I kept walking my boots, echoing in the empty hall outside. The night was crisp, the stars hidden by city lights. I leaned against the building, sucking in deep breaths, trying to figure out what I was supposed to do. Next, part of me wanted to storm back in there, grab the mic and tell everyone the truth. How I'd pawn my granddad's watch for her first semester, how I'd work through fevers and exhaustion just to keep her in school. But what would that get me? A room full of pity. I didn't want their pity. I wanted my wife back. I wanted the life we'd planned, the one where we'd celebrate this together, not with me. Standing out here like some stranger, I rubbed my face, my hands rough against my skin, and thought about Julian. Who was he? Some rich guy she'd met at school. A doctor, a lawyer. He didn't look like he'd ever lifted anything heavier than a briefcase, and yet she'd picked him to stand beside her to take my place. My mind flashed to the time she'd come home late, saying she'd been studying with friends. Had he been one of them? Had she been building this other life? Right under my nose, I kicked the wall, the thud loud in the quiet, and cursed under my breath. I trusted her. I loved her. And now I was nothing to her. Just a shadow. She'd stepped over on her way to something better. Stie's words stuck with me. Though you're everything she's not saying. Maybe she was right. Maybe Camille could rewrite our story for her fancy friends. But she couldn't erase the truth. I've been there every step, every dollar, every tear. I wasn't just a friend. I was the man who'd held her up when she couldn't stand on her own. And as I stood there, the cold sinking into my bones, I realized something I didn't need her to say it. I knew who I was. The question was, what was I going to do about it? I didn't have an answer yet, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let her lie be the end of me. Not tonight, not ever. I sat in my truck in the parking garage, the engine off the keys, dangling in my hand, just staring at the concrete wall ahead. The graduation ceremony was still buzzing in my head. Camille's voice, that guy, Julian, the way she'd smiled like I didn't exist. My chest felt tight, like someone had parked a car on it, and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I'd walked out of that hallway with S's words ringing in my ears. But now, alone in the dark, all I could hear was Camille saying, "Mason, he's just a friend. Just a friend. 6 years of my life, and that's what I got. I wanted to hit something, to scream, to make sense of it. But instead, I just sat there, the silence pressing in around me like a weight I couldn't shake. The garage was dim, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead, casting shadows that danced across the dashboard. I parked here hours ago, full of pride, thinking I'd be driving home with my wife, the doctor laughing about how we'd made it through now. I didn't even know where home was anymore. My phone buzzed in my pocket, probably Sad checking on me. But I didn't look. I couldn't face her pity right now or any. Once I needed answers, and the only person who could give them to me was Camille. I'd seen her head toward the garage with Julian and her friends, all of them chattered-ing like they were on top of the world. I'd waited, not sure why, until the crowd thinned out. Maybe I wanted her to see me to remember I was still here. Maybe I just wanted to know how she could do this. I spotted her then walking across the lot, her heels clicking on the pavement. Julian was with her, his arm around her waist, and they were heading for a sleek black car that looked like it cost more than I'd made in a year. My stomach twisted, but I pushed the door open and stepped out, my boots loud against the ground. "Camille," I called, my voice rough, echoing off the concrete. She stopped, her head snapping toward me, and for a second, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Shock, maybe guilt. Julian turned too, his eyebrows lifting like he was surprised I could talk. "Mason," she said, her tone sharp, like I'd interrupted something important. "What are you doing here?" I took a step closer, my hands clenched at my sides. What am I doing here? I came to see my wife graduate. You know, the one I've been supporting for 6 years. My voice was louder than I meant it to be, but I didn't care. She flinched, glancing at Julian, then back at Mason. "This isn't the time," she said, smoothing her hair like she could brush me off that easy. "I've got people waiting. We can talk later." Later, after she just called some other guy, her husband, in front of everyone, I laughed short and bitter, and it sounded wrong in the empty garage. "No, Camille, we're talking now. Who the hell is this guy?" I jerked my head toward Julian, who straightened up, his jaw tight, like he was ready to step in. Camille's face hardened, and she crossed her arms. "This is Julian, my husband. I thought you'd figured that out by now." Her words hit me like a slap, cold and final, and I stared at her, waiting for the punchline, but she just stood there, her chin up, like she was daring me to argue. "Your husband," I said, my voice cracking. "Since when last I checked, I was the one you married. I was the one paying for all this." I waved a hand toward her gown, her fancy life. 6 years, Camille. I worked 3 jobs so you could stand on that stage tonight, and now you're telling me I'm nothing." She sighed loud and dramatic, like I was the one being unreasonable. "Mason, don't make this a scene. You were never part of this world. I couldn't have them thinking I came from nothing. Julian, he gets it. He's in this with me." Her words cut deeper than I thought they could, each one slicing through the years I'd spent believing in us nothing. I repeated, stepping closer, my voice low and shaking. "I gave up everything for you. My granddad's watch, my weekends, my health gone so you could have this, and you're standing there telling me I'm nothing." Julian moved, then putting a hand on her shoulder, like he was protecting her from me. "Look, man," he said, his voice smooth and smug. "She's made her choice. You need to let it go." I turned on him, my fist stitching to wipe that smirk off his face. "You don't get to talk to me," I snapped. "You don't know what I've been through for her." He raised his hands, backing off a step, but his eyes said he wasn't scared, just annoyed like I was a bug. He wanted to flick away. Camille stepped between us, her face cold. "Now, Mason, stop. You've done a lot." "Okay, I'm grateful you supported me when I needed it. But Julian's my future. He's where I'm going. You wouldn't understand the pressure. I'm under pressure." I almost laughed again, but it caught in my throat. "Pressure," I said, my voice rising. "You think I don't know pressure? Try working 16 hours a day, coming home to a cold bed, eating ramen, so you could have steak with your study group. I lived pressure so you wouldn't have to, and now you're throwing it back in my face." She didn't answer, just looked away. Her lips pressed tight. Julian shifted, checking his watch like I was wasting his time. That's when it hit me. She wasn't even sorry. She'd planned this. Maybe not from the start, but somewhere along the way. She decided I wasn't good enough, and she'd found someone who fit her new life better. I took a deep breath, forcing my hands to unclench. "You're right," I said, quieter now, the fight draining out of me. "I don't understand. I don't get how you can look at me and say that after everything." She met my eyes then, and for a second I thought I saw something. Regret maybe, but it was gone fast. "I'm sorry it's like this," she said, her voice flat. "But it's done. Go home, Mason. Go home, like it was that simple, like I could just walk away and forget the life I'd built for her." I stared at her, the woman I loved, the woman I'd carried, and I didn't recognize her anymore. "Yeah," I said. Finally, turning back to my truck, "I'll go." I didn't look back. As I climbed in, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame, the engine roared to life, and I peeled out of the garage, the tires screeching on the concrete. My hands gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white and my eyes burned. But I didn't cry. I wouldn't give her that she'd taken enough from me already. As I hit the open road, the city lights blurring past, I felt something shift inside me. She thought this was the end, that I'd just fade away. But she was wrong. My silence wasn't surrender. It was the start of something else, something she'd never see coming. I didn't know what yet, but I'd figure it out. I always did. I drove home that night with the windows down, the cold air, whipping through the truck, trying to clear the fog in my head. Camille's words kept looping in my mind. "You were never part of this world." And every time they hit, I felt the sting all over again. My hands gripped the steering wheel, the rough skin of my palms catching on the worn leather, and I couldn't stop thinking about the past 6 years. The truth of it, not her shiny new version. I pulled into the lot of my one-bedroom apartment, the place I kept, so she could have her fancy condo near campus, and cut the engine. The silence settled in, heavy and thick, and I just sat there, staring at the cracked dashboard, letting the memories flood back. I needed to remember it all, every second I'd given her, because if I didn't, she'd win. She'd rewrite me out of her story, and I'd be left with nothing. It started 6 years ago when Camille came home from her waitressing job with a wild look in her eyes. "Mason," she said, dropping her apron on the couch, "I want to be a doctor. I know it's crazy, but I can do it." I laughed at first, thinking she was joking, but she wasn't. She had this fire in her, this dream. She buried under years of late shifts and bad tips. I saw how much it meant to her, and I loved her for it. So I said, "Okay, babe, let's make it happen." I didn't know then what it had cost me, but I'd have said, yes, anyway. That's what you do when you love someone. You jump in, even if the water's deep. We sat up all night figuring it out. She'd need to quit her job, go back to school, Take the hard classes first and money. God, the money. Tuition books right near the university. I told her I'd handle it. I'd make it work. The first semester was the toughest. I was still just a mechanic, then pulling decent hours, but it wasn't enough. I remember the day I took my granddad's watch to the pawn shop, a beat-up old thing he'd worn every day of his life. It wasn't worth much, maybe a couple $100, but it was all I had left of him. The guy behind the counter slid the cash over, and I felt a lump in my throat as I walked out. I didn't tell Camille where the money came from. Just handed her the check for her first tuition payment and said, "You're on your way, babe." She hugged me so tight that night, her tears soaking my shirt, and I thought, this is it. This is us. I didn't care about the watch. I cared about her smile. After that, it was all a blur of work. I picked up the warehouse gig, loading boxes until my back screamed, then started driving Uber on weekends when the bills piled up. I come home at dawn, sometimes my eyes half open, and find her asleep on the couch with a textbook across her chest. I'd carry her to bed, her head heavy against my shoulder, and I'd feel this quiet PR cry. She was doing it, acing her classes, impressing her professors, and I was the one holding it all together. I miss things, though. My buddy's wedding, because I couldn't skip a shift. My mom's funeral, because the flight was too expensive and Camille had a big exam that week. I told myself it was fine, that family would understand, but it ate at me. I'd sit in the dark, sometimes eating cold leftovers, wondering when I'd get a break. But then Camille would come home, exhausted but happy, and tell me about some test. She'd crushed, and I'd think worth it. The distance started creeping and slow like rust on a car. You don't notice until it's too late. She'd stay late at school, saying she was studying with friends. I'd call and she'd sound distracted, rushed. "I'm fine, Mason, just busy," she'd say, and I'd let it go. Friends warned me. Guys at the shop, my sister even said. "Once she's changing, man, B say, you sure she's still in this?" I brush them off. She's stressed. I tell them med school's hard. She needs me to keep it steady. I believed it because I had to love made me blind. I guess I'd see her come home in new clothes, nice stuff I didn't buy. And she'd say it was a gift from a classmate. I'd nod. Too tired to push and keep working, always working one night, stands out. Maybe 2 years in, I'd been sick. Fever chills, the works. But I couldn't miss a shift. Rent was due and her textbooks weren't cheap. I came home shaking, barely able to stand, and she was there studying at the table. She looked up worried and said, "Mason, you're burning up, go to bed." I shook my head, said I'd be fine. But she got up, made me soup, sat with me while I ate. She held my hand, her fingers soft against my rough skin, and said, "I couldn't do this without you." I fell asleep with her next to me thinking we were solid. But looking back, that was one of the last times I felt close to her. After that, she started pulling away. Longer nights out, shorter talks, excuses, piling up. I told myself it was the pressure that she'd come back to me when it was over. I was wrong. I snapped out of it back in my truck, the memories fading into the dark. My hands were cold. Now the keys digging into my palm. I'd given her everything, my time, my money, my heart. And she'd taken it all, then handed it to someone else. I thought about that condo I'd paid for, the one I'd never lived in because it was closer to campus. I'd stayed in this dumb with its thin walls and leaky roof, so she could have something better. I'd skipped meals, worked through pain, let my own life shrink down to nothing. All for her. And now she was standing there with Julian saying I didn't fit her world, like I was some dirty secret sheet outgrown. I climbed out of the truck, slamming the door hard enough to make the frames shake, and trudged up the stairs to my apartment. The place smelled like motor oil and stale coffee, the way it always did. I dropped onto the couch, staring at the ceiling, and felt the anger settle in deep, not just at her, but at myself. I'd let this happen. I'd ignored the signs, the warnings, because I loved her too much to see the truth. But not anymore. I sat up, my jaw tight, and looked around at the life. I'd let slip away the pond, watched the missed moments, the years I'd poured into her. They were gone, but I wasn't. I was still here, still breathing, still me. She could have her new world, her new husband. I'd find my own way back, not for her, not for anyone else, just for me. And that was enough for now. I stood outside that swanky downtown venue, my hand stuffed in the pockets of a suit I'd never worn before, watching the lights spill out onto the street. It was Camille and Julian's engagement party. Yeah, they moved fast, and I wasn't supposed to be here. The invitation hadn't come my way. Not that I expected it to. I'd heard about it from Sadie, who'd called me up, her voice tied with anger, saying she's acting like you never existed. Mason, it's not right. I didn't plan to show up, not at first. I'd spent the last few days after the graduation trying to keep my head down, fixing cars, loading boxes, driving strangers around, anything to keep my mind off her. But something in me wouldn't let it go. Not revenge, not exactly. I just needed them to know I wasn't invisible. So there I was in a suit I bought years ago for a wedding. We never had, holding an envelope that felt heavier than it should have. The place was packed, fancy cars lined up, people and dresses and ties. Laughing like money grew on trees. I could hear music drifting out. Some soft jazz thing that didn't fit my world. My boots felt loud on the pavement as I walked up, the doorman eyeing me like I was lost name. He asked, flipping through a clipboard. "Mason Reed," I said, keeping my voice steady. "These." He frowned, scanning the list, then shook his head. "You're not on here." I nodded like. I'd expected that and said I won't be long, just dropping something off. He hesitated, then shrugged and waved me in. I guess I didn't look like trouble, not yet anyway. Inside it was all gold and glass, chandeliers sparkling overhead, waiters weaving through with trays of tiny food I couldn't name. I spotted Camille right away, glowing in a white dress that hugged her like it was made for her. Julian was next to her, his arm around her waist, talking to some older couple who looked like they owned half the city. His parents, probably her med school friends, were there too. Clink-in in glasses and a couple of young guys with cameras, maybe media interns snapping pictures. I stood by the wall for a minute, taking it in, feeling the weight of that envelope in my hand. It wasn't anger driving me. Now it was something quieter, something I couldn't name. I just knew I had to do this. I started across the room, my steps slow but sure, and I saw Camille's head turn, her eyes locked on mine, and her smile faltered. Just for a second. She whispered something to Julian, who GL aimed my way, his face tightening. I didn't stop. People parted around me, their chatter fading as they noticed something was off. I reached the little stage where a mic stood, probably for speeches later, and I stepped up, tapping. At once the sound cut through the room, sharp and loud, and every head turned. Camille's face went pale, and Julian took a step forward. Like he might stop me too late. I pulled the envelope out and held it up. My voice, calm but firm. "Evening, everyone. I'm Mason Reed. You don't know me, but I've got a story to tell." I opened the envelope and slid out the papers. Bank statements, tuition receipts, a spreadsheet. I'd spent hours putting together 6 years ago. I said, looking out at the crowd. My wife, Camille, decided she wanted to be a doctor. I told her I'd make it happen, and I did. I held up the first sheet. This is every dollar I paid. Due $220,000 and change textbooks, rent tuition. I worked 3 jobs: mechanic, warehouse loader, Uber driver. Upon my granddad's watch, skipped meals, missed my mom's funeral, all so she could stand here tonight. The room was dead quiet. Now just the hum of the mic and the rustle of paper. I glanced at Camille. She was frozen, her hands clenched, and kept going. I didn't do it for thanks. I did it because I loved her. But a few days ago at her graduation, she introduced this guy. I nodded at Julian. As her husband said, I was just a friend who helped out. So I figured you all deserved the truth. I flipped through the pages, letting them see the numbers, the dates, the proof. Every sin I made, I gave her. I lived in a 1-room dump so she could have a condo downtown. I worked through Fever's 16-hour days because I believed in her dream. And now she's here celebrating with you, and I'm not even a name on the list. I paused, letting it sink in, then looked straight at Camille. I may not be the man beside her today, but I'm the reason she ever made it here. That's all I came to say. I set the papers down on the podium, stepped off the stage, and started for the door. The silence broke. Then gasps, whispers, a few claps. I didn't expect. I didn't look back. I heard her voice as I reached the exit. Mason, wait, but I kept walking outside. The air hit me cold and sharp, and I sucked it in deep, my heart pounding. I'd done it not to hurt her, not to ruin her night, just to stand up for myself. My truck was parked a block away, and I was halfway there when Sadie caught up her heels, clacking on the sidewalk. Mason, that was insane. She said, breathless, her eyes wide, "You okay?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. Yet they're freaking out in there. She went on. Camille's panicking, Julian's pissed. You shook them up. I shrugged, kicking a pebble across the street. Didn't do it for them, I said. Did it for me. She grabbed my arm, stopping me. You didn't have to. You know you could have let her have her, Lee. I looked at her, the street lights, catching her worried face, and shook my head. No, I couldn't. She doesn't get to erase me, Sadie not. After everything, she nodded slow, like she got it and let go. What now, she asked. I didn't have an answer. Not really go home, I guess. I said, turning toward my truck, figure it out tomorrow. She watched me go, and I could feel her eyes on my back as I climbed in and started the engine, driving away the city. Lights blurred past, and I felt lighter than I had in days. Not happy, not yet just unburdened. I laid it all out, every sacrifice, every dollar, and they couldn't unhear it. Camille's world might have cracked a little tonight, but mine didn't. I'd stood there in my cheap suit and scuffed boots and told the truth. Not her truth, not Julian's, mine. And as the road stretched out ahead, dark and quiet, I realized something. I didn't need their applause or her apology. I'd taken back what she tried to steal: my story, my worth. It wasn't much, not compared to their fancy party, but it was mine. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. I woke up the next morning with my head pounding, the kind of ache that comes from too little sleep and too much thinking. My apartment was quiet. The early light sneaking through the blinds, hitting the empty coffee mug on the table. I barely slept after the engagement party, just sat on the couch, staring at nothing, replaying what I'd done, walking into that room, taking the mic, spilling 6 years of my life for strangers to hear it, felt like a dream. something I'd watched someone else still. But it was real. The envelope was gone, left on that podium, and so was the weight I'd been carrying. I didn't know what would happen next, but I'd lit a match, and now I could feel the heat. I dragged myself to the kitchen, brewed some coffee, and tried to shake the F. My phone buzzed on the counter. Sad again, probably checking in. I ignored it for now, needing a minute to brief. The TV was on low, some morning news show, and I was halfway through my first sip when I heard it, "Local man speech at engagement party goes viral." My stomach dropped, and I turned up the volume, staring at the screen. There I was, granny footage from someone's phone, standing on that stage with my papers in hand. I work 3 jobs. I'm the reason she ever made it here. My voice crackled through the speakers. The anchor cut in saying Mason Reed's story of sacrifice has sparked a firestorm online, with thousands sharing his words. I sank onto the couch, the mug warm in my hands, watching my life spill out for the world to see. It didn't take long for things to spiral by noon. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Texts, calls, voicemails from numbers I didn't know. Sty finally got through, her voice fast and excited. "Mason, you're everywhere. People are losing it. Over this, Camille's freaking out." She called me crying, saying it's a PR nightmare. I rubbed my face, trying to process what she's saying. I asked my throat dry. Sty hesitated, then said she's trying to spin. It told her friends you exaggerated, that it wasn't all you, but no one's buying it. Not. After those receipts, I nodded, even though she couldn't see me, and muttered, "Good." I didn't want her tears or her excuses. I just wanted the truth to stick. The day got weirder from there. I went to the shop figuring work would keep my head straight, but the guys were already on it. "You're famous, Ree," my buddy Tony yelled, waving his phone. "Look at this unsung hero of med school." "That's you, man." I shrugged it off, grabbing my tools, but inside my chest tightened. I'd only meant to stand up for myself, not start. Some circus customers started asking about it too. Guys dropping off cars, saying, "Heard you on. The news? Mason, hell of a story." I kept my hours short, focusing on oil changes and brake pads. But it followed me by the time I clocked out. My voicemail was full, reported ERS mostly wanting interviews. I deleted them all. I wasn't here for their headlines. That night, Sty showed up at my place, her eyes bright, with something I hadn't seen in her before. "Pride. Maybe you need to see this," she said, shoving her phone at me. It was a post from one of Camille's med school friends, some guy named Derek. I lived with Camille and Mason for a month. It read, "He's not lying. He worked himself to death for her check full of it." Sty grinned. "Hune, not the only one. People are talking, her classmates, old neighbors. They're backing you up." I scrolled through, seeing more tweets, comments, even a video from a girl who'd worked with Camille at the diner. Mason was the real deal. She said Camille's acting like he didn't exist, but we all saw it. I handed the phone back. My jaw tight. "Didn't expect this," I said. STI nodded. Neither did she. The next day it got bigger. I was at the warehouse hauling boxes when my boss pulled me aside. "You got a call?" he said, handing me his phone. It was Dr. Simone Ornette, Camille's mentor, the one I'd seen at the graduation. Her voice was calm, professional. "Mr. Reed, I owe you an apology. I didn't know the full story. What Camille did. It's disappointing." I stood there, sweat dripping down my back, not sure what to say. "Oh, thanks," I managed. She kept going. "I saw the papers you left. It's impressive what you did. If you ever need legal advice, I know people no charge." I mumbled something about appreciating it and hung up my head, spinning legal advice. I didn't want to fight. I just wanted peace. But peace wasn't coming easy. Camille's world was cracking, and I could feel it even from where I stood. Sadie told me later that Julian's parents were furious. Something about their family name getting dragged through the mud. Her med school friends were whispering, pulling back, and her mentors were asking questions. I didn't care about ruining her, but I wasn't sorry either. She'd built her castle on my back, then kicked me out the gate. Now the walls were shaking, and she had no one to blame but herself. I kept waiting for the anger to hit me again, but it didn't. Instead, something strange started happening. People thanked me. It started small. A guy at the gas station clapped me on the shoulder, said, "Heard your story, man, respect." Then a lady at the grocery store, older, with tired eyes, stopped me. "You remind me of my husband." She said he worked like that for me too. Don't let her take that from you. I nodded, awkward, not used to this, but it kept coming. Notes left on my truck, messages online, even a kid at the shop who said, "You're like a superhero, mister." I didn't feel like one. I felt tired, raw, like I'd been scraped clean. But those words, they stuck. They built something in me I hadn't expected. By the end of the week, I was sitting on my couch again, the TV off, just listening to the quiet. My phone buzzed another message, this time from a local reporter asking for a sit-down. I deleted it, same as the others. I didn't need their cameras. What I needed was to figure out what this meant for me, not her. I'd thrown my truth out there and it had landed hard, but it wasn't about revenge. It was about standing up, being seen. And now people were seeing me not just as Camille's shadow, but as Mason Reed, the guy who didn't quit. I leaned back, closing my eyes, and let that settle. The whir could keep spinning. Camille could keep scrambling. I'd done my part. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe, like the air was mine again, not hers. And that was enough to keep me going. I was tightening a bolt on a rusty old Chevy at the shop when Tony slapped a newspaper on the workbench, grinning like he'd want something. "Check it out, Reed," he said, pointing at the headline. The man who funded a doctor's dream then got erased. My name was right there, in big black letters, next to a blurry picture of me from the engagement party holding up those papers. I wiped my hand, hands on a rag, my stomach doing a flip, and picked it up. Local mechanic Mason Reed's story of sacrifice has captured hearts. It started, and I skimmed the rest. Words like inspiration and resilience jumping out at me. I tossed it back on the bench, shaking my head. "Didn't ask for this," I muttered. But Tony just laughed too late. "Man, you're a hero now." I didn't feel like a hero. I felt exposed, like someone had ripped open my life and put it on display. The shop was busier than usual that day. Guys dropping off cars, lingering to shake my hand, saying stuff like, "Heard about you, Mason. Hell of a thing you did." I nodded, kept my hours short, and focused on the work wrenches and oil. I could handle this spotlight stuff was new, and I wasn't sure I liked it. But it didn't stop. By lunch, my phone was buzzing again, sad this time, saying, "You see the article? It's gone viral. Mason people love you." I grunted, chewing on a sandwich, and told her I just want to fix cars, not be some poster boy. She laughed, but I could hear the pride in her voice. "Too bad, you're stuck with it." The next day, it got real. I was at the community center near my place dropping off some old tools for their shop class, when a guy in a suit came up to me, Mason Reed. He asked, sticking out his hand, "Name's Carl. I run a blue-collar heroes panel. Heard of it?" I hadn't, but I shook his hand anyway, my grip firm from years of work. "We talk about guys like you. he said. People who keep the world running, that speech you gave. We'd love you to speak at our next event. I stared at him, my mouth dry. I'm not a speaker, I said, shifting my weight. I just said what I had to. He smiled like he'd heard that before. That's why we want you. It's real. Think about it. He handed me a card and walked off, leaving me standing there, the tools heavy in my hands. I thought about it all day through my shift at the warehouse, through the Uber runs that night, me on a stage again, talking to a room full of strangers. It wasn't my thing. I liked quiet. The hum of an engine, the feel of a wrench turning. But something about Carl's words stuck. Guys like me, keeping the world running. I'd spent years running for Camille, and now people saw me for it. Not her, not Julie and me. I called them back that night, my voice steady. I'll do it, I said, but I'm not fancy. I'll just tell it like it is. He laughed. That's perfect. The panel was a week later, at a big hall downtown. I showed up in my best jeans and a clean shirt, no suit. This time felt more like me. The room was full, maybe 100 people, all working types, truckers, builders, factory guys. I sat on a folding chair listening to the others talk stories of long hours, family struggles, quiet wins. Then it was my turn. I stepped up the mic, heavy in my hand, and looked out at them. I'm Mason, I said, my voice rough but clear. I'm a mechanic, worked 3 jobs for 6 years, so my wife could be a doctor. She made it, then told everyone I was just a friend. I showed up at her engagement party with the receipts $20,000 worth. Not to hurt her, but to say I was there. I paused the room, dead quiet. I'm not special, just a guy who did what he had to. If that's a hero, then we all are. They clapped loud, real claps, not the polite kind from Camille's crowd. A few guys stood nodding, and I felt my face heat up. I sat down quick, my heart pounding, but it wasn't bad, it was good. After people came up, shook my hand, told me their own stories. One guy older with a limp said, I work doubles for my kids. School wife left too. You're not? Alone, son. I nodded, throat tight, and realized he was right. I wasn't alone. This was bigger than me. Now things kept moving. After that, my side hustle fixing cars out of my garage picked up. Local guys started calling, saying you're the real deal, Mason. Can you look at my truck? Then a couple of them small business owners showed up with an offer. We'll back you. They said, get a real shop going. You've got something people trust. I didn't say yes right away. Money's tight and I'm careful. But I didn't say no either. It was a chance when I hadn't seen coming. Then, out of nowhere, a doctor from the clinic where Camille used to enter called, saw your story. He said, I'm building a program healthcare for working families. Need a consultant who gets at you in. I laughed, surprised. I'm no doctor. I said. He chuckled. Don't need to be. You know the grind. That's enough. I took the gig part-time. Nothing big, but it paid. I'd sit with him, talk about what guys like me need. Cheap checkups, late hours, no fancy nonsense. It felt good, useful. My name was starting to mean something, not because of her, but because of me. People stop me on the street now. Cops, welders, moms with tired eyes, all saying, keep going, Mason. I didn't know what that meant yet, but I nodded, kept moving. The shop idea grew too. Those investors pushed, and I started sketching plans on napkins late at night when the world was quiet. One evening, I was at the community center again, tinkering with an old engine for the kids' class. When Sty showed up, you're different, she said, leaning on the workbench, calmer, stronger. I shrugged, wiping grease off my hands. Maybe I said, Just figuring it out. She smiled soft. They calling you a blue-collar legend online. Camille hates it. I snorted, shaking my head. Let her hate it. I'm not doing this for her. Steve nodded, and we stood there, the engine humming between us. I didn't need Camille's stage anymore. I had my own small, rough reel. The spotlight had turned, and I wasn't running from it. I was standing in it on my terms, and it felt like mine. For the first time in years, I wasn't just the guy behind someone else. I was Mason Reed, and that was enough. And that, I was elbow deep in a transmission at the shop when my phone buzzed in my pocket the third time that morning. I wiped my hands on a rag, figuring it was Sadie or maybe another reporter who wouldn't quit, and pulled it out. It was a text from an unknown number. Mason, it's Camille. We need to talk, please. I stared at it, my thumb hovering over the screen, feeling that old ache creep up my chest. I hadn't heard from her since the engagement party, not directly, just whispers through Sadie about her scrambling to save face. Part of me wanted to delete it, let her stew in whatever mess she'd made, but another part, the part that still remembered her asleep in my arms, wouldn't let me. I typed back, slow and careful. What there to say? She replied fast. I never thought you'd actually leave. I set the phone down, my jaw tight, and went back to the car. I didn't know her an answer, not anymore. The next few days, I kept busy shop, work, warehouse shifts, meetings with the doctor about that clinic program. But her message stuck with me, nagging like a loose bolt. I couldn't tighten. I didn't want to care, but I did. Then Sty called, her voice low. Mason, it's getting rough for her. She's up for some big fellowship, and the hospital board's digging into your story. Julian's backing off too, as families, pissed about the publicity. I leaned against my truck, the sun hot on my neck, and sighed. Not my problem, I said, but it didn't feel true. I'd started this. Whether I meant to or not, she's texting me. I admit it. Sty went quiet, then said, What did she say? I told her, and she snorted. She's scared, Mason. She's losing everything she built, and now she's looking back. Don't let her pull you in. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. I won't, I said, and hung up. A week later, I got a call from a lawyer, some guy named Harris. Voice smooth like he, charged by the hour, Mr. Reed. He said, I've been following your situation. You've got a case for spousal repayment. 6 years of support documented, could be a big payout. I was in my kitchen stirring instant coffee, and I stopped cold. A case, I said, like sewer. He went on all business, legal terms, percentages, how I'd invested in her career. I cut him off. I didn't do it for money. I did it for her. Harris paused, then said, Fair enough. But she's reaping the rewards, and you're not think it over. He left his number, and I sat there, the coffee going cold, staring at the wall. Sue her, drag her through court, make her pay me back. It didn't sit right. She'd taken enough from me. I didn't want her debt too. Meanwhile, the world kept turning. My shop was picking up. Those investors pushed me to sign a lease on a bigger space, and I was fixing more cars than I could count. The clinic gig was steady too. Real work, helping guys like me get checkups without breaking the bank. People still stopped me, said my story kept them going, and I'd nod awkward but grateful. But Camille's reckoning was happening, and I couldn't ignore it. Sty told me the hospital board called her in a review meeting for that fellowship. She had to explain it all. Sty said over the phone, Your speech, the receipts, how she played it off. They're not happy. I pictured her in some sterile room facing suits with stern faces and felt a twinge. Not piss, pity, not quite. but something close. Check. Figure it out. I said she's smart. Stahyi huffed. Smart doesn't fix this. I heard later through the grapevine that Julian was gone. His parents pulled him back. Didn't want their name tied to her mess. Sponsors dropped her too. Some big grant she'd been chasing fell through. I didn't cheer, didn't gloat. It wasn't my win to celebrate. I'd said my piece, and the fallout was hers to carry. But that text kept gnawing at me. I never thought you'd actually leave, like she'd expected me to stay quiet and loyal while she built her new life. I didn't reply, didn't plan to. She'd made her choice, and I'd made mine. Still, it lingered a loose thread I couldn't cut. One night I was at the community center tinkering with an old bike for the kids' class. When Stee showed up. "She's not getting the fellowship," she said, leaning on the workbench boards, holding off reputation concerns. "They called it." I kept my eyes on the chain, adjusting it slow. "She'll bounce back," I said, my voice flat. Stahyi crossed her arms. "Maybe, but shake alone. Now Julian's out, her friends are quiet, she's feeling it." I nodded, not sure what to say. "You think she deserves it?" Stahyi asked, her tone sharp. I set the wrench down, wiping my hands. "I don't know," I said. "Not my call. She'll have to carry her debt differently, not in cash, but in her head. That's worse." Stee watched me, her eyes searching you. "You're not mad anymore," she said, more statement than question. I shrugged. "Mad doesn't fix it. I said what I needed to rest is on her." She nodded slow, and we sat there, the hum of the fluorescent lights filling the silence. I didn't hate Camille, not anymore. I'd loved her once, poured everything into her, and she'd thrown it away. But that was her burden now, not mine. I'd walked away not to destroy her, but to save myself. And I had the lawyer called again a few days later, pushing the case. "Last chance, Mason." He said, "She's vulnerable now. Perfect time to strike." I cut him off. "No," I said firm. "I'm done fighting her. Let her live with it." He sighed like I was a fool and hung up. I didn't care. Money wouldn't give me back those years, wouldn't erase her words. I'd rather build something new than claw at her ruins, the shop. Lease was signed that week. My name on the door reads Auto in bold letters. The clinic program grew too, more families coming in thanking me for keeping it real. I was moving forward, not looking back. That night, I sat on my couch, the TV off, just listening to the quiet. Camille's text glowed in my mind, but I didn't touch my phone. She'd never thought I'd leave, because she'd never seen me, really seen me. I'd been her rock, her bank, her shadow, and she'd assumed I'd stay that way. But I wasn't that guy anymore. I was Mason Reed, mechanic consultant, the guy who'd stood up and walked away. She'd face her reckoning, alone or not, and I for mine, building a life that was mine, not hers. I leaned back, closing my eyes, and let it go. The past was hers to carry the future. That was mine, and it felt solid, like something I could hold on to, something real. I stood on the stage at the grand opening of Forge, my hands shoved in my pockets, the crowd buzzing below me like a hive. I'd stirred up. It was a year since that night in the parking garage, a year since Camille tore my world apart, and here I was, 36, still a mechanic, but something more now. The building behind me was brick and steel. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. Forge wasn't just a repair shop. It was a menhip center, a place for young guys like I'd been to learn a trade, fix a car, build a life. The sign above the door read, "Forge strength through work," and I'd picked every word myself. Local entrepreneurs flanked me, guys who'd invested. After my story went viral, along with Sadie, who'd taken on the community coordinator role, I looked out at the faces, Kids, parents, neighbors, and felt my chest tighten, not with nerves, but with something I hadn't felt in years. Pride. The mic was in my hand and I cleared my throat. The sound sharp over the speakers. "I'm Mason Reed." I said, my voice steady, rough from a long day. A year ago, I was working 3 jobs, trying to hold up someone else's dream. It didn't work out, but I didn't stop this place. Forge, it's for guys who don't stop either. You don't need a degree to make something of yourself. You need grit hands that work and a chance. That's what we're here for. The crowd clapped loud and real, and I stepped back, letting STI take over with the details, classes, schedules, all the stuff she was better at. I watched her dark hair bouncing as she talked, and thought about how she'd stuck by me when no one else did. She'd seen the truth back then, and now she was here building this with me. The day was a blur after that ribbon. Cutting handshakes, kids running around the shop, touching tools like they were toys. I showed a group of them how to change a tire, my hands moving slow so they could follow, and their eyes lit up like I'd handed them gold. One kid, maybe 16, skinny with a chipped tooth, said, "You're the guy from the video, right? The one who didn't quit." I nodded, wiping grease off my fingers. "Yeah, that's me." He grinned. Cool, I didn't feel cool. I felt tired, worn, but his words stuck. People still talked about that speech, the receipts, the way I'd walked out of Camille's life online. It was a legend now. But to me, it was just the day I stopped being her shadow. Later, I was in the back office sorting through some paperwork. "When Sadie came in with a letter mail for you," she said, tossing it on the desk. The handwriting was familiar, Camille's, and my stomach flipped. I hadn't heard from her since the text months ago, the one I never answered. I picked it up, the paper thin in my hands, and hesitated. "You going to read it?" Sty asked, leaning on the door frame. I shrugged. Maybe she rolled her eyes but didn't push, leaving me alone with it. I tore it open, my pulse loud in my ears, and started reading. It was long, messy. Her words spilling over the page like she'd written it in a rush. "Mason," it began. "I've been trying to find the right way to say this. I'm sorry, not just for what I did, but for who I became. I lost myself in that world, and I lost you. I see it now. Everything you gave me, everything I took. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just hope you're proud of who you are." I set it down, my hand steady, and stared at the wall. Proud of who I was. I thought about that, about the years I'd spent breaking myself for her. The nights I'd come home to nothing, the way she'd erased me. And then I thought about now, the shop humming outside, the kids learning the life I built from the wreckage. Yeah, I was proud. Not because of her apology, but because I'd made it here without her. I folded the letter, slid it into a drawer, and didn't write back. She didn't ask me to. She didn't ask for anything. Just left it there like a weight she needed to drop. I let her have that. It wasn't mine to carry anymore. The rest of the day went smooth. More tours, more thanks from parents who said, "This is what my boy needs." One guy, a welder with rough hands like mine, pulled me aside, "Heard your story." He said, "Built something like this myself once. Keep it up." I nodded grateful and watched him go. The investors were happy too, talking. Expansion, all already, maybe a second. Location. I didn't say much, just listened, letting it sink in. This wasn't just a fluke. It was real growing mine. Sadie caught me later grinning. "You're a natural at this," she said. "Bossing people around, teaching kids." I snorted, hardly just doing what I know. She shook her head. "It's more than that. You're giving them what you didn't have." That night, after everyone left, I locked up and stood in the empty shop. The smell of oil and metal thick in the air, the tools were lined up, The floor swept everything in its place. I ran my hand over a workbench, feeling the dents and scratches, and thought about Camille's letter. She'd seen it. My strength, my worth. But too late. I didn't need her to tell me. Now, I saw it myself and the kids who'd hung on my every word in the space I carved out. I'd spent years chasing her dream, thinking it was ours. But this was mine. No degrees, no fancy suits, just me and what I could do with my hands. I drove home under a dark sky, the truck rumbling steady, and felt the quiet settle in. Not the heavy kind I'd known before, but a good kind, a full kind. The next day I'd be back at Forge teaching, fixing building. Sadie would be there, keeping it all together, and the kids would show up eager and loud. It wasn't perfect. Money was tight, hours were long, but it was enough, more than enough. I pulled into my lot, cut the engine, and sat there, the letter flickering in my mind. I hope you're proud, she'd written. I was not for her, not because of her, but for me. I'd forged something out of nothing, and it stood strong. I climbed out the night cool against my skin and headed inside. The apartment was still small, still rough, but it didn't feel empty anymore. I kicked off my boots, dropped onto the couch, and closed my eyes. Tomorrow was another day. Another chance to keep going to show those kids what I learned the hard way. You don't need someone else's stage to shine. I found mine, built it from the ground up, and it was solid. That was my win. Quiet and real, and no one could take it from me. Not her, not anyone. I was Mason Reed, and I was proud. I stood by the lake at sunset, the water flat and golden, watching a handful of Forge apprentices wrestle with an old boat engine. I dragged out here for them to practice on. The air smelled like damp earth and gasoline, a mix that felt right to me, and their voices carried over the quiet laughs, curses, the clank of tools. I leaned against my truck, arms crossed, letting the breeze cool the sweat on my neck. It had been a long day teaching a morning. Class at Forge, fixing a busted radiator at the shop, then hauling this engine out here for the kids. But I wasn't tired. Not the way I used to be. This was different. This was peace, the kind that settles deep, not from noise or crowds, but from knowing I was where I belonged. The kids were a mess, grease on their shirts, arguing over a wrench like it was a prize, but they were getting it. One of them, Jake, the skinny 16-year-old with a chipped tooth, looked up and grained, "Think we got it, Mason," he yelled, cranking the starter. The engine sputtered, coughed, then roared to life. A rough growl that made them all cheer. I nodded, a small smile tugging at my mouth. "Not bad," I called back. "Now take it apart and do it again." They groaned, but they were laughing too. Already reaching for the tools, I watched them, my chest full, and thought about how far I'd come. A year ago, I was a ghost in my own life, chasing Camille's dream. Now I was here teaching these kids to build their own. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky red, and I took a deep breath, letting it fill me up. This spot by the lake was mine, a place I'd found after everything fell apart, where I'd come to think to let go. I'd spend hours here over the months, staring at the water, piecing myself back together. I thought about Camille a lot in those early days. Her voice, her laugh, the way she looked at me once like I was whole world. I loved her hard and deep, and I'd pictured a life with her kids, a house, maybe a dog tearing up the yard. That dream was gone, now scattered like leaves on the wind. But standing here, I didn't miss it. Not anymore. I'd let it go, not with anger, but with a quiet nod to what was. I kicked a rock into the water, watching the ripples spread, and my mind drifted to her letter. It had been weeks since the forge opening, since I'd read her words. I hope you're proud, and tucked them away. I hadn't written back, hadn't called. She didn't need me to. She'd said her piece, and I'd taken mine. STI told me later that Camille was still in the city, working at a smaller hospital. No fellowship, no Julian. She's quieter now. Sad had said, her voice soft, like she's figuring it out. I nodded, not asking more. Camille's life was hers to live, her mistakes hers to carry. I didn't wish her ill. I never had, but I didn't any. Mine was enough. The kids finished up the engine in pieces again, and Jake jogged over, wiping his hands on his jeans. You coming tomorrow? He asked, eyes bright. We're doing brakes next, right? I nodded. Yeah, I'll be there. Don't be late, you're leading it. His grin widened and he ran back to the group, yelling something about being the boss. I chuckled, shaking my head. Forge was growing. More kids, signing up more donors. Pitching in the shop was steady too, Reed's Auto in name. People trusted the clinic program, kept me busy, helping. Families like mine had been working folks who just needed a break. It wasn't big or loud, but it was real, and it fit me like my old boots, worn but solid. I thought about the years. I'd given Camille 6 long ones every day, a grind for her dream. I'd been the man behind the degree, the one who'd carried her to that stage. But now, standing here, I was the man behind my own name. I didn't need her validation, didn't need her to clap. For me, the kids' cheers the hum of a fixed engine, the way Sad smiled when we locked up Forge. That was my applause. I'd built this life from the ground up, not with fancy words or a sharp suit, but with my hands, my sweat, my stubborn refusal to quit. And it was mine, every dent and scratch of it. The sky darkened, the last light fading, and I called the kids over. Pack it up. I said, my voice, carrying time to head out. They grumbled but got to it, hauling the tools into the truck bed. I helped lifting the engine with Jake, our shoulders brushing as we worked. You're good at this, I told him, setting it down. He shrugged, shy. Now learn from you. I clapped his back, not saying more. That was enough. We piled into the truck, the kids squeezed in the back, laughing and shoving, and I drove them home. The road dark and familiar, dropping them off. I watched them scatter, Jake waving, the others yelling goodbyes, and felt that peace again, steady and warm. Back at my place, I parked and climbed the stairs. The night quiet around me. The apartment was the same, small, rough, smelling like oil, but it felt different, now full. Somehow I kicked off my boots, grabbed a beer from the fridge and dropped onto the couch. The lake lingered in my mind. The water, the kids, the engines roar. I thought about Camille one last time. Not with pain, but with a kind of distance, like looking at an old photo you don't need to keep. She'd been my world once, and I'd given her everything. But she'd taken it and walked away. And I'd found something better. Not her stage, not her spotlight, mine. I took a sip, the cold biting my throat, and leaned back, closing my eyes. Tomorrow I'd be up early. Forge the shop, the clinic, more kids to teach, more cars to fix, more people to help. It wasn't glamorous, wasn't loud, but it was real. I didn't need headlines or crowds. I had this, the lake, the work, the quiet wind of knowing who I was. Mason Reed, not the man behind her degree, but the man behind his own name. I'd fought for it, built it, earned it, and as the night settled in, I let the past slip away, final and gone. The future was here in my hands, and it was enough. More than enough, it was mine.